the Olympics comes around once every 4 years. And how do you really practice for an event like that? It is so intense, and the distractions are immense. There's no other competitive event like the Olympics. And athletes go into that, I think, ill-prepared to deal with all of those distractions and additional stressors. So that was my intent, to have somebody step into that virtual world, experience what the Olympics is like, and really feel the nerves and emotions that go with that, so that then they know what they're going to experience, and we can start to use mental skills to allow them to cope with that, know what to expect, and know how to cope, know how they respond.
Welcome to today's episode of Coach Noah Talks, powered by Integrity Golf Performance. I hope you enjoy.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Karen Cogan, for taking the time to speak with me today.
You are welcome. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, so I want to jump right in. Can you tell us a bit about your academic background and then also professionally what you have been doing throughout your career, what you're doing now? And then we're going to jump into something I'm really excited about, which is virtual reality in high-performing sports.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of a long story because I've been in this career for 30 years, but I'll try to make it a little bit short. My sport was gymnastics. So growing up, I did that competitively and competed at UCLA for 2 years, and then injured my knee pretty badly. And that's where I think I became interested in the mental aspects of sport, and in particular recovering from an injury. So both the performance side of things as well as the mental health side of things. And from there, I got an undergraduate degree in psychology from UCLA, also a master's from UCLA in kinesiology. And the focus there was on sports psychology. So I got my start there learning how to work with teams and the foundations of psychology and sports psychology, and then went on to get my doctorate degree from Ohio State in psychology, counseling psychology, and was able to work with some teams there. You know, the field of sports psychology was pretty new at that time, so I had to make my own way, so to speak, but was able to get some experiences. And now in my current career, it's taken a little while to get to the USOPC. This was always my goal, to work with Olympic athletes full time. But for the past 12 years, I've been here at the USOPC, and I work with the acrobat and combat sports as a sports psychologist, but also support athlete mental health. And we now have a really great mental health team. But previous to that, a couple of years ago, I was doing a lot of work in the area of athlete mental health and supporting athletes that way. And in between all of this, I became interested in virtual reality, which I know you probably have some more specific questions about, but I've been doing that as one of the techniques I use with athletes to help them with their performance.
Yeah, really interesting. So so is it basically at the working with Olympic and Paralympic athletes, certain people are specialized or allocated to certain sports? Is that generally how it works then?
Right. We have something that we call sportfolios. And so we've divided the sports into, sports that have similarities. So in my case, it's acrobat sports. That's sports like diving, gymnastics, artistic swimming, skateboarding, and surfing. And then sports that are combat sports, fencing, wrestling, judo, taekwondo, and boxing. So it's a lot of sports. And I don't work with all of them in the same way. I have connections to each sport, and some of them I work with more than others. I travel with them. I go to their events and their camps. Others, it's more one-on-one or as needed group presentations. So it just depends on what the sports are asking for.
I understand. And so I saw your presentation at the ASP conference recently, and that was really eye-opening to me with the virtual reality piece. So I really want to spend the majority of our time on that. So why are you interested in virtual reality, and what kind of got you interested in that, in this combining that with the field that you work in?
Well, I've always used imagery a lot as a mental training skill for the athletes I work with. And I find that to be very useful. And I used it myself as an athlete, but not everybody finds that easy to do. So they might close their eyes, not get an image that they want. They might not see the image successfully as they want. It keeps going awry, I started to think, well, how can we help make that more useful? And I know that athletes watch a lot of video. They watch video of their performances, and it's more of a coaching thing. They learn, oh, I can do this better. I can change this. And the coaches work with them on that sort of thing. I thought, well, that's great. You watch the video, you close your eyes, see if you can imagine it still. And people still had trouble with that. So I happened onto a conversation with one of my colleagues in New York. His name is Rob Udowitz, and he's a psychologist there. He's worked with athletes and in particular some fencers. And he was working on it was almost like a video game. So you saw it was an animated version of a fencer, and you would see that opponent coming at you, and then you use the controls to make a decision about what do you do. If they're coming at you this way, what do you do? So he was sort of dabbling in that, but it was expensive, and it was taking a long time to get that to come together. So I thought, well, what resources do I have here at the USOPC? And our technologist at the time, his name is Monir Zak. He's not with our organization now, but at the time he got me connected with some of our sponsors and some technology companies. And we started to look at how could we produce virtual reality segments that our athletes could use. So I wanted to do it, not animation. I wanted it to be actual footage. So we looked into I did some work with Oculus for a little bit, and then ended up with a local company here in town called Bourbon Street Productions. And over time, it's a long story, of course, but over time I was able to gather footage in 3D, both footage that I took at events I was attending, and also NBC had taken some 3D footage from the Rio Olympics. So I was able to get footage from some sports, both through NBC and through what I had taken. And Bourbon Street was able to put these into what we called vignettes. So they were probably 4, 5, 6-minute videos of clips of different parts of the competition in 3D. And we could put those into goggles. Athletes can put those on, and they can look all the way around, and they can see what's going on. And so we're actually creating imagery for them realistically and as if they are there. I think the reason that was so important to me was that the Olympics comes around once every 4 years. And how do you really practice for an event like that? It is so intense, and the distractions are immense. There's no other competitive event like the Olympics, and athletes go into that, I think, ill-prepared to deal with all of those distractions and additional stressors. They've been to the World Championships. That's hard, but they know what that's about. That comes every year. And they've been to World Cup events or other international events. And again, they have time to practice with those, but they don't really get to practice with the Olympics. And some of them only have one shot at the Olympics anyhow. So that was my intent, is that to have somebody step into that virtual world, experience what the Olympics is like. We had segments of the opening ceremony, competition, award ceremonies, and really feel the nerves and emotions that go with that, so that then they know what they're going to experience, and we can start to use mental skills to allow them to cope with that, know what to expect, and know how to cope, know how they respond. So that's where it all came about.
That's really interesting. And can you go into a bit, what have the use cases been? Obviously, it's been a process learning how to incorporate it, but can you talk about how are you using it in a way that helps these different performers?
Well, so one of the ways is doing it one-on-one. They'll come into my office for an appointment. I will say, hey, I've got some footage of Olympic footage in diving, for instance, so they're a diver. And let's look at that. And so we put on the goggles, they go through that scenario. And then as we're doing it, they're telling me, wow, I can feel the nerves. That's so intense, or sometimes they're more interested in looking around like, who do I know that I can see, right? So sometimes we have to do it more than once. You have to do it initially for them to see what it's all about. And then we do it. Okay. Pretend as if you were there at the Olympics competing. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. What's the emotional experience you're having? And then we can talk through that. And I've had athletes almost come to tears with emotion because it's so intense. They haven't been to the Olympics yet, and this is their goal. And they see people they know competing, and they see what that experience is like. And it almost brings them to tears, the emotions around thinking about competing at the Olympic Games and representing our country. So then we work with those emotions and, give them a sense of what is it going to feel like when you go to the opening ceremony and you're standing there? What's it going to feel like when you march out right before you compete? What does it feel like when you hear the national anthem? If somebody wins a gold medal, right? So we kind of work with those emotions and give them some coping strategies. The other way I've done it is in a group setting. I did this with wrestling. So I had them broken up into groups of 3. So one person had the goggles on, the other was acting like an opponent. So actually physically touching the other wrestler. And then the third one was calling out scenarios. Okay, like pretend like this happened. So anyways, they've got the goggles on. They see the competitive atmosphere. Somebody's in front of them, moving them, pushing them around, and someone else is saying, okay, now pretend like this happened. And what are you going to do? And it was actually pretty effective. That I didn't know that that's how I was going to use it, but we were experimenting with it. And afterwards, the athletes talked about the intensity of the emotion they felt, and then having to, breathe and take a moment and focus and, practice the skills that we had been talking about. So that was another way that I've used it.
That's interesting, because that's what really sparked my curiosity, was the way that it can, because it's so immersive, it really can trigger or elicit responses, physical and psychological responses that you can't otherwise get. And those are then opportunities to practice skills in a more authentic way, where there's actually really a response that's that's occurring.
Yes, absolutely. And again, because the Olympics comes every 4 years, you only have every 4 years you get to practice the Olympics. I hope with the virtual reality, you get to practice it more often than that. The other thing that we did with it is, because of the pandemic going into the Tokyo Games, normally we take groups of our staff out to Tokyo before that, so people know where everything is in the airport, how to get around, what the village looks like, what the training centers look like, what the venues look like. And we weren't able to do that. Nobody was able to travel. And so Bourbon Street was able to find a production company over there who went and filmed some of those locations in 3D, brought it back, and they basically did sort of a pre-arrival in Tokyo Olympic vignette. So shows when you arrive in the airport, this is what it looks like, this is where you go. When you arrive at the village, this is what it looks like, this is where you go. So all those things we weren't able to do in person, we were able to see those virtually, and we passed it around amongst our staff, because our staff is usually, they're there ahead of time. They've got it all figured out. When the athletes come, we can just direct them. They don't have to worry about anything, but we weren't able to do those kinds of things due to the travel restrictions. So that's another way we used it that we never expected to be using it that way.
And so it sounds like the practice of it is mainly from a seated position, but the one example with the wrestling is also trying to include it in more active movements. Is that really just depending on the sport and what it allows for? Obviously, wearing VR headset while diving probably with this current state of technology isn't feasible at the moment, at least.
Yeah, well, there's two things. One is the state of the technology, and one is safety. So, when you put these goggles on, and I'm sure many of the listeners have tried this, but you literally drop into this other world. And, if you look in front of you and see that there's an open space, you think you can walk into it, but you're actually in your room. So you'll walk into the wall, or, you trip over something. And so with the athletes, they get injured enough just in doing their sport. I don't want to be the cause of them being injured because they're using these goggles. But so, typically it's good if they're in a chair that swivels so they can move around, turn around, look around, and experience it that way. But, in the wrestling room, it is pretty open, and they had their teammates there. And so we decided that, okay, you're going to put these on and you're going to move around a little bit, and, but everybody be super mindful and help out your teammates. If you see them go in the wrong direction, you got to help them and direct them back the right way. So it's a little more risky to do that. So that's one thing. The technology itself, obviously, if you're using a water sport, you can't use it while you're doing that. So you would have to be more stationary. And the technology too, the filming of it, I had originally wanted to be able to put a camera, say, on an athlete's forehead here so that you see in first person what they're seeing. And they would move around and do things, and then we would put that back into, especially for fencing, you see the opponent coming at you. And then we put that into the vignettes that they would watch. But that sort of movement, it's too much for the 3D piece, and it makes people feel nauseous usually when they're watching it. So the filming itself had to be more stationary. I've seen some VR vignettes of skiing. So as someone's going down, the smoothness of the movement through the gates and things, that's actually okay usually for most people. But the bouncing that fencers do, it was not good. So we have to wait for the technology to get a little bit better before we can film in that way.
Yeah. And, I work a lot with golfers, and that's where my mind went to being able to film a hole or a golf course and potentially walk a golf course from your home, or navigate through a golf course or parts of it from your home before you even arrive at the actual tournament location. And I felt like golf seems to lend itself quite well to potential uses of VR.
Yes, absolutely. And we did that with equestrian. I wasn't involved in that project, but when they found out what I was doing, they asked Bourbon Street to go in and film their course so that they could practice that ahead of time. And it would be similar with golf. So absolutely, that's been done before. I think that would be a great use of it.
For people, if they're putting this headset on and, let's say if they're seated and they turn around, they see what's around them. But if they move forward or backward, it's moving as well with them. Like their perception is changing. Like if they're walking closer to the pool, or they're walking closer to the baggage carousel at the airport, or is that not the case?
No, typically not. So if you get up and move, you still see whatever you see in that picture. But like if you turn to the side, you're going to see whatever's on the side. If you look up, you're going to see what's up. But if you're moving around, you're actually not really moving through what's been filmed. Now, I know that technology is out there. I had gone to an Oculus conference a few years ago, and they actually had rooms where you could move through wearing that technology, and you would go through doors, and it was interactive that way. So I haven't been able to do that yet, but I know that is out there.
Absolutely. So can you shed some light into your own experience filming? Because I think you partner with a company that does it, but I think you mentioned in the presentation also that you have tried to do it yourself or parts of it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how that was and what you've learned, what didn't work, what you'd recommend for other people?
Yeah, well, and I, as you know, I'm a sports psychologist. I am not a videographer. I'm not a technologist, and I had a crash course on learning how to do this. But once you know some basic things, and the technology is much more simplified now, it's not impossible to do it yourself. So I've done it both ways. Oculus did send a film crew to one of the fencing events, which was amazing. The professional people, and they had the high tech equipment, and they went in there and they filmed a bunch of things. And I just had to tell them where to go and what to film, so that was easier for me. But that's very expensive typically, when you get that many people in a film crew, plus all the equipment, plus the filming. And so we're working with a budget, of course. And my other option, and plus I travel with these athletes to events out of the country, all over the world. And it's hard to send a film crew to, Spain or Russia or wherever we are. Just the cost of that alone, would break my budget. So the other alternative was for me to learn how to film myself. And it used to be that I had this round ball. It had 6 cameras, GoPros basically all around it. And it looked like something out of Star Wars. And so and it was very heavy. The stand for it was heavy. I would have to have a whole other bag to travel with it. And it got quite a lot of attention. People, what are you doing? What is that? But I'm trying to place this kind of in the middle of the activity of the competition, because ideally I want to get right in the middle so that the 3D goes all around. You can see everything that's going on. Practically, I usually can't get right in the middle of it. I have to be off to the side a little bit, but I get as close as I can.
So you're saying be in the middle, ideally, because then you have the perspective from that
Right.
central piece of the location, basically. It's better than being off on the side.
Right. So if I'm filming diving, if I could be in the middle of the pool, right, that would be ideal. Or, if it could drop down from up above and be right in the middle, that would be ideal. Or gymnastics, put it right in the middle of the floor exercise mat. But, that's never going to happen the way we have it set up now. So I have to get off to the side. And I'm not usually allowed on the floor that close to everything. I can get pretty close to the activity, but usually I'm not allowed right on the floor. So I get as close as I can, and I try to get as centrally placed as I can, and then film around. And sometimes really it's 180 degrees that's really has any meaning, or it's, slightly more than that, because I'm standing on the side and all the action is going on in front of me. But still, people can look up into the stands, or they can look up above them or look to the side and see who's there, so they get the whole picture that way.
And just to clarify, is it that wherever you're standing and filming from, that is the angle that the person is seeing when they put on the goggles?
Right. So that's where the camera is, and the camera is filming all the way around. So I try to get as centrally located as I can so that we can pick up things all the way around. Or if you're in a soccer field, like being in the middle of the soccer field, that would be the ideal place for it. People running all around you, you can see what's going on. And that way you would totally use the 360 part of it. Now I have a smaller camera that is much easier to use and to travel with. It's called an Insta360, and it's pretty small. It's not as doesn't look like it's out of Star Wars, doesn't get as much attention. So I'm able to kind of, stealthily get in there and set it up and not ruffle too many feathers. But anyhow, that's ideally what I'm trying to do. And because, usually it requires a credential to get onto the floor of these competitions. So I have the credential. I don't have a filming credential. So sometimes I do get kicked out of the filming part of it, but I can get closer than most people can. So I've just tried to be creative in how I get on to the competition floor and where I can stand and where I can film from.
Really, really fascinating. And one thing I'm curious from your perspective is, how do you see VR developing in this, let's say, in the Olympics or just in high performance environments going forward?
Well, it's interesting. In Tokyo, I had my camera, and I noticed that some of the film crews also had the same camera, and they were doing the same thing. And we talked about whether we could coordinate on a few things, and that didn't really amount to much. But other people were doing the same kind of thing. I know that NBC also got some additional VR footage at the Olympics. So I know it's starting to happen more, and it's just, what do you do with it? The processing of it to do what I've tried to do, it can get expensive. It's time consuming for the company to go through and put the vignette together the way it needs to be. It's not a skill that I have or can really learn. The filming part I could learn, but just given all my other responsibilities, it's not a good use of my time to learn that. So it is better for me to send that cost out, but still it's a cost. And so this is not unlimited, and the vignettes need to be fairly short. Athletes lose attention after a while. You want to just hit the really important points and give them that experience in a fairly short vignette. So but I think people are doing it more and more. In fact, after the presentation I did, I've had several people reach out to ask more about it, or they're trying to do some work in that area or do some research. And so I think that it is used more now. I think in football, I know there has been some use of it, looking at plays, like especially for a quarterback. What choice points do you have? What's going on out there? What do you do? How do you make those decisions quickly? So I think it can be useful in sports where you have to have quick reaction times, and there's a lot going on, and you have to very quickly know what to do in that moment. You don't have a lot of time to think, so you can practice with those kinds of skills. So I do see it being used more and more that way.
Within the market, more, I guess, technical question, have you tried different headsets? Have you noticed differences? Are there things you've learned, just best practices from having gone through some of these experiences? Because there are different options out there on the market.
Right. In the beginning, I had a Samsung phone that we loaded the vignettes on, and it clipped into the goggles, and had lots of problems with that. We had to restart a lot. Sometimes it just wouldn't work. And that technology has improved quite a bit. The headset I'm using now is a Pico headset, which is a much smaller company, but it's very user friendly. Everything is, internal to the headset itself. I'm not having to clip a phone in or anything, and they can just load the vignettes. I don't have as many problems with it crashing on me or having to restart. The company that I'm working with has set things up in a kind of a menu of vignettes. So we have all the diving ones together, all the fencing ones together, all the gymnastics ones together. And the athlete can navigate through what they want to see and just pick out of that menu what to look at. And before it was kind of all over the place, and I had to tell athletes exactly where to go. And it became less user friendly. So they would lose interest, but now it's so easy to use. So I'm really happy with the ones that I have now.
And can you talk a bit about feedback from, Olympians and Paralympians? What's the feedback been over time? Because I imagine it's slowly getting more popular, but any experiences or reflections on that?
Well, I think most people find it really amazing. And especially if they see themselves or their teammates in there, that also, there's something personal about it. So, I've had reactions like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I really felt like I was there, and this helps me practice for what I'm going to face. I've had others say there was just too much going on, because there was so much to look at and watch. And others did feel a little bit of nausea as they watched it. So I will say it's not for everybody. Not everybody likes it, but more and more, especially the younger generation coming into sports, they've been doing this already, playing video games, so they're very used to it. It's not unusual, but then to be able to see themselves or teammates or people they know, great athletes in their field, does make it much more personal. And this is not on the market. This isn't available to everybody. It is really just available to the athletes I work with. So these specific sporting events, it's pretty unique for them. So most of them find that it's pretty useful.
And one thing also, actually, at the ASP conference, there was a presentation on, the research on people's ability to actually do imagery, and this idea of aphantasia and hyperphantasia, meaning there is a population of people who seem to not be able to do imagery, the numbers are like 2 to 5%, but even the percentages aren't high within the research. This is kind of either a tool for those people that don't have the ability. Apparently, when I listen to it, is like they close their eyes and they can't see things. This is a great tool to not have them necessarily fall behind. And also for people that might just need a better understanding or support in building that skill. If you see the pool and then I take it off and then I close my eyes, it's probably easier for me to see it than if I'm only relying on my ability to do imagery.
Yes, absolutely. And that's sort of where the idea came from, was the athletes who we were trying to do imagery, and they said, I just can't, I can't see these images. Or I can't see them the way I want to, or they're just very blurry. So that's absolutely a way that someone can, who has trouble with imagery, could use these goggles, because you are really seeing it. And one of the things I've done in the past with athletes who struggle with imagery is say, okay, well, let's watch a video of yourself competing. Okay, then immediately close your eyes. Can you get that image back? And so we would try some things like that. And same with the VR. You're having the whole experience. So can you have that experience, and then can you close your eyes, and can you see it? I work a lot also with kinesthetic imagery. So I'm wanting athletes to feel things. And sometimes if they can't see things, maybe they can feel it better, or that's a way that they can practice it. As an aside, I will say too, that sometimes, especially with my acrobat sport athletes, I find that doing too much imagery causes them to overthink. And that's not really helpful in a sport like that. You want to go on autopilot when you're competing. So the idea of using kinesthetic imagery, we can move more towards, how does it feel? Can you remember how it feels on that dive when you take off? Or can you remember how it feels when you enter the water? the right way. So then they're not thinking quite so much. We're moving it to a different component of how they experience the dive.
Yeah, actually, I want to slight tangent, but go back to what you just said about being on autopilot, because that's something I convey a lot to the golfers and athletes I work with. I'd love, just from your experience, obviously you mentioned that imagery can sometimes get them thinking too much. So this might not be directly related to VR, but could you expand a bit on this autopilot piece, why that's important? Because I think for a lot of people, they're not necessarily trying to be in the Olympics or in the Paralympics, but they think that they need to be thinking more to play their best or perform their best.
Yeah. Well, there's a place for thinking, and that's when you're learning a skill or getting coached and working on a really specific technique. You do have to think about, wait, what am I doing and how am I doing it? And what's the coach telling me to do? How do I make that correction? But when you do too much of that, and, especially in a sport where you're having to move smoothly and quickly, that causes you to check yourself too much along the way. And then the movement, it's over, right? So when you get to where you've mastered the skill, or you're close to mastering the skill, or you're trying to compete with the skill, that's where you say, okay, it's like cramming for the exam. You're not going to learn anything more in 5 minutes before you go. You have to trust your training. And so that's what we work on when it comes to competing. You are where you are. You're not learning anything more in the next 5 minutes and all the instruction your coach is giving you. You want to turn on that autopilot, and you're going to do the best that you can, and hopefully do some pretty incredible stuff too. So when it comes to competing, and again, I work a lot with gymnastics and diving, and the skills happen so fast. If they're thinking, that usually causes them not to perform as well. They have to turn it on and just go. And within seconds, the dive is over, or the flip is over, or whatever. So we really do aim towards turning the mind off, picking one or two key focus points, maybe a general keyword of how they want to look and feel out there, but nothing too specific. And we just want them to compete the way they know how.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Coach Noah Talks, powered by Integrity Golf Performance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Golf Performance newsletter. This is where I share written, audio, and video content designed to help golfers take their game to the next level. All the relevant links from today's episode and to the newsletter can be found below. See you next time.